Hi, this is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at 3 Oysters Caramel Macchiato. I'll do a writing sample of Caramel Macchiato on 52 GSM Tomoe River paper using a variety of pens and nib sizes ranging from a Pilot Extra Fine to a 1.5 stub nib. I'll compare Caramel Macchiato to other golden brown inks from my collection. I'll take a look at some writing samples that I did with Caramel Macchiato on other papers of varying fountain pen friendliness. And finally, I'll take a look at the water resistance test and chromatography. When I did the writing sample with Caramel Macchiato in a glass dip nib, I noticed that it did come out a little bit quicker at first, but then kind of evened out. It wasn't as bad as some inks, but it was still very enjoyable. Really, you can see when I wrote the 3, it looks a little bit heavier than the rest of the writing, but the rest of the writing looks very uniform and was very pleasant when I was doing the writing. When I did the swatch with my tweezers, it grabbed this Tomoe River paper very nicely and made a very crisp swatch. You can see that it's a little bit darker at the beginning, and it can get fairly light here toward the middle. The drip at the end of the swatch, there's not any sheen, but there's a very visible halo of darker ink. And it's subtle, but I do notice a bit of a halo in the letters also. I'm going to begin my writing samples with a Pilot Kakuno. It has an extra fine stainless steel nib. Now, there was a significant amount of feedback here. I wouldn't call it scratchy, but the feedback along with, since this is kind of a lighter ink, the legibility to me is decreased in this really fine line. So for me, this is okay. Next, I'll be writing with my Pilot Custom 74. It has a 14 karat fine nib. There's a fair amount of feedback with this nib also, and I feel like this fine nib, since it's a little bit wider than the extra fine, it's spreading the ink out a little bit more. They're very close in the amount of ink that's being put down, but since this fine nib is spreading it out more, you're getting more of these lighter shades. So to me, it doesn't help the legibility of it. This one's just okay also. Next, I'll be writing with the Lamy logo. It has a stainless steel fine nib. Okay, this Lamy fine nib is writing pretty dry, and so I'm getting primarily these lighter shades, and it feels smoother than the first 2 nibs, but it also feels drier. So the writing experience was just okay with this one also. I wish this nib was a bit wetter. In the previous ink review that I did with this pen, I had the medium nib and it was a bit too wet. I need to do some playing around with these Lamy nibs and get a better handle on how they write. Next, I'll be writing with a Conklin Symmetric. It has a stainless steel medium nib. I'm liking the way this pen and ink combo looks. I'm getting that nice golden brown look, kind of like we had up here with the glass dip nib. Now, I got this pen recently. This is a new addition to my collection, and I bought it new old stock from a seller on eBay. I think this is from the 2010s, around that time. It's a blue, a dark blue, kind of a blue-black, and a brown cracked ice resin. And I'm glad I decided to try it with this ink, because this nib, I've tested it with a couple different inks, and it's a fairly wet writer. I did have to do some work on it. It was a little bit scratchy, but I noticed in my testing of it that it's a pretty wet writer, and apparently that's what this ink needs. Next, I'll be writing with a Kaweco Lilliput. It has a stainless steel double broad nib. All right, it's attractive and all. It's leans toward more of the gold, this shade down here, than the golden brown. I think I'm just spoiled by this one. I like that, the darker shade. This felt nice. It was nice and smooth. Maybe felt a little dry compared to other inks that I've tried with this nib, but I would call this one nice. And I need to go back and make a note on this symmetric that it was nice, exclamation point. This medium nib, I also need to note, has a little bit of a chalky feel to it. And finally, I've got my Pen BBS pen, and it has a 1.5 stub nib. That was very nice. Felt very luxurious. I like the amount of ink that's being put down. Just a nice combination of the dark brown and the light golden brown. That looks really good, and it felt very pleasant. While this dries, we'll take a look at some of the other writing samples. On my Rhodia paper, the glass dip nib, again, wrote very uniformly and was very pleasant. I had a little trouble keeping the tweezer swatch, keeping it on the paper, the ink holding on to the paper. I really had to slow down to keep it applying ink. And just like on the Tomoe River, the larger nibs were nice, and the finer nibs just felt too dry. On copy paper, Caramel Macchiato, the wider nibs were just okay, and you can kind of tell by the look, they look a little blobby. By that I mean splotchy, like the inks not coming out completely uniform. And you can kind of see on my ink smears where I do the X and then smear the ink, you can see that the ink just soaks into the paper really quickly. Generally, with inks that do that, they just don't look the best. On the back, You can see where it really soaked into the paper. You can see the last few inks were like that. But this ink over here, Herbin Cacao de Brazil, was one of the better inks that you can see when you do the ink smear, it sets on top of the paper and actually smears. It doesn't soak into the paper as bad. In my Leuchtturm bullet journal, where I did my writing sample with the stub nib, I'm at a weird time of day. You may not be able to see it, but the shading is just really nice, and you can see it's very subtle, but that halo effect on the letters. This ink and the purple gray were very pleasant to write with on this Leuchtturm paper. It felt really nice and luxurious. As I began writing with Caramel Macchiato, I started thinking about all the inks in my collection that this reminded me of. The first one was Lee de Tay, and I'm like, am I remembering this correctly? Are they that close? And Lee de Tay is very similar, but it leans a little more brown. But you can see it still has that light golden brown component. I also thought of Noodler's Golden Brown, and you can see they are similar, but you can see a lot more of the yellow in golden brown. KWZ Honey is another one that's pretty similar. It's got a wide range from dark to light. And as I was writing with Caramel Macchiato, I felt like I was seeing a lot of yellow in it, but when you put it next to an ink that has a brighter yellow component, it makes this one look a little more orange. Robert Oster African Gold is similar, though it's got a little bit more yellow and quite a bit more of that halo effect. Cafe Crema, Robert Oster Cafe Crema, is very similar. They both have that little hint of orange to them. And as I was going through my inks, I thought I would throw this one in there. Ackerman SBRE Brown. They look very similar, but SBRE Brown has even more orange to it. And SBRE Brown has some sheen in the halo. I did a writing sample on a small piece of Rhodia using all the pens from the original writing sample. And since this ink I thought looked so similar to Lee de Tay and Noodler's Golden Brown, I was hoping that it would have a water-resistant component. Well, it did, but the water-resistant component was the yellow instead of the brown. So for all practical purposes, this does not have a legible water-resistant component. And you can see that in more detail from the chromatography. The yellow component is the one that hung around near the bottom, and it was a purple component that lifted up off the paper in that water resistance test. In Noodler's Golden Brown, there's a brown component that sticks to the bottom and a bright yellow lifts up. And I believe in Lee de Tay, there's a gray or a black component that sticks near the bottom, and maybe a yellow or a brown lifts up. Okay, I'm glad this ink had a coffee-themed name so that I would try it with this, my new pen, my new Conklin that has some brown in it. That's probably the pen that I will be using this in the most. Like I mentioned, I've had a little trouble with the inks that I've tried in that pen, but this one does seem to be a winner. And this ink seems to be one that you're going to want to use in a fairly wet nib. It looks like, I don't know, maybe not. It came close to bleeding through. I think this is another one of those inks that is actually pretty wet, but it's watery. It's wet in the sense that it's watery, and it doesn't provide you much lubrication between the nib and the paper, so you need a fairly smooth nib also. And I guess that's why it needs to be kind of wet to give you the most lubrication between the nib and the paper. It's an attractive ink, and I'm glad I've got a sample of it. If you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.